I used to think the most humiliating thing that could happen to a person was being insulted in public. I was wrong. The most humiliating thing is realizing the people who taught you to endure pain are the same people cheering when it finally breaks you. The restaurant was loud that night. The good kind of loud. Cutlery clinking, glasses touching, low laughter spilling from tables that felt warm and alive. The kind of place where people celebrate birthdays, promotions, anniversaries. The kind of place where you expect memories to be made gently. I remember thinking, as I slid into my chair, maybe tonight will be different. I hadn't seen my sister in months. Not because we were busy, but because distance had become the only way I could breathe around her. She had always been louder than me. Sharper, more certain of her right to dominate a room. And I had always been the one expected to adapt, to soften, to stay quiet, to understand how she is. My mother was already seated beside her when I arrived, smiling that careful smile she used whenever she didn't want tension to surface. The smile that said, "Please don't make this harder than it has to be." I sat down anyway. I always did. Safe topics. Stories that avoided anything real. But my sister doesn't thrive in peace, she thrives in imbalance. It started subtly, the way she always started. A comment about my job. "So, you're still doing that?" She tilted her head, pretending curiosity. "Already smiling," I answered calmly. Briefly. The way you respond when you've learned that defending yourself only feeds the fire. Then came the finances. "Must be nice not having real responsibilities," she said, swirling her drink. "Some of us actually carry weight." My mother chuckled lightly, not because it was funny, but because silence would have meant disagreement. I felt that familiar tightening in my chest. The warning signal my body sends when it knows what's coming. I tried to redirect the conversation, asked about her work, about her kid, about anything that would keep the attention off me. But she wasn't interested in conversation. She was interested in control. I remember thinking how strange it was that something so comforting could exist in the same moment as dread. That's when she leaned back in her chair and said it. Loud enough for our table to hear. Clear enough for the ones closest to us to turn their head. "You know," she said casually, "it's honestly embarrassing how you still sit there like you belong." I froze. Not because I didn't understand what she meant, but because she had never said it out loud before. I looked at her, hoping, stupidly, that maybe she'd that maybe she'd realize she'd crossed a line. Instead, she stood up. The movement was so sudden that the chair scraped loudly against the floor. The sound cut through the restaurant like a knife. I didn't even have time to react. Her hand came across my face fast and sharp. The crack echoed, not just the sound of skin meeting skin, but the sound of something breaking in public. My head snapped to the side. My cheek burned. My ears rang. And before I could even process the pain, she yelled, "Know your place." The restaurant went silent. Not an uncomfortable silence, a stunned one. Forks hovered mid-air. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every table around us turned, and in that stillness, that awful exposed stillness, I looked at my mother. She didn't rush to me. She didn't ask if I was okay. She sighed and said calmly, as if explaining something obvious, "She deserved it." That was the moment. Not when my sister slapped me, not when my face burned, not when the room stared, but when I realized I was alone at that table, and everyone else had already decided who was allowed to hurt me. Silence has a sound when it's forced on a crowded room. It hums. That was the first thing I noticed after my sister's hand connected with my face. Not the pain, not the heat blooming across my cheek, but the way the restaurant seemed to inhale all at once and forget how to exhale. Forks froze halfway to mouths. A wine glass trembled in someone's hand. A laugh died so abruptly it sounded like it had been strangled. Every single eye in that place was on us. I sat there, stunned. My head still turned slightly from the force of the slap. My heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. It took a few seconds for the sting to fully register. A sharp, pulsing heat that spread from my cheekbone down into my jaw. But what hurt more than the slap itself was the way my sister stood there afterward. She didn't look shocked. She didn't look embarrassed. She looked satisfied. Like she had just corrected something that had been irritating her for a long time. Her chest rose and fell slowly, deliberately, as if she'd rehearsed this moment in her head and was pleased with how it landed. And then my mother spoke. She deserved it. 3 words. Soft, flat, final. They didn't echo the way the slap had, but they sank deeper. I felt something inside me go very still. Not numb, clear. It was the same clarity you feel when a truth finally drops into place after years of denial. I wasn't the problem. I never had been. Another voice followed. Did she just? Chairs shifted. People leaned back to get a better view, not out of curiosity but disbelief. A man 2 tables away stood up halfway from his seat, then hesitated, unsure if he should intervene or stay out of it. A woman near the window covered her mouth, eyes wide, her gaze flicking between my face and my sister like she was watching something she couldn't quite process. My sister finally seemed to notice the attention. She glanced around, her expression flickering, not with shame, but irritation, as if the room had overstepped by witnessing something that was none of their business. Sit down, she snapped at me under her breath. Don't make this worse. That was when I realized how deeply twisted her sense of reality was. She had slapped me in public, and somehow, in her mind, I was the one embarrassing her. I didn't sit, not because I was brave, but because my legs wouldn't move. My body was still catching up to what had just happened. The waiter, who had been standing a few feet away holding a tray, finally found his voice. "Ma'am?" he said carefully, looking at my sister. You can't do that here." She turned on him instantly. "Oh please," she scoffed. "This is a family matter." That phrase, family matter, had been used my entire life as a weapon. It was how things were excused, how lines were crossed, how harm was minimized. My mother nodded along. "Yes," she said, "we'll handle it." But the room wasn't buying it. Because abuse doesn't become private just because it happens between relatives. The manager appeared quickly, his expression tight, professional, alert. He didn't rush over dramatically. He walked with purpose, the kind of walk someone uses when they've already decided what needs to happen. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, though his eyes were fixed on my face. I opened my mouth to speak, but my sister beat me to it. "She's fine," she said sharply. She was being disrespectful. Disrespectful. I let out a short, breathless laugh before I could stop myself. It wasn't humor. It was disbelief. The manager didn't look convinced. "Ma'am?" he said to my sister. "Did you strike her?" My sister straightened, lifting her chin. "Yes," she said. "And I'd do it again if she didn't know her place." The audacity of it rippled through the room. You could feel it. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This wasn't a heated moment that got out of hand. This was someone who believed she had the right to hurt another person, and expected to be backed up. The manager exhaled slowly. "I'm going to need you to step away from the table." My mother bristled. "You can't speak to her like that," she snapped. "That's my daughter." "So is she," the manager replied calmly, nodding toward me. That was the first time all night someone had publicly acknowledged that I mattered to. My sister laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "This is ridiculous," she said. "You're taking her side?" "I'm taking the side of basic safety," he answered. Then he turned slightly and gestured toward the host stand. "Please call security." The word security changed everything. My sister's expression flickered again just for a moment, and this time, it wasn't irritation, it was uncertainty. She hadn't expected consequences, she'd expected silence, compliance. My submission. She turned to my mother, waiting for backup. My mother stood up slowly, placing a hand on my sister's arm. "We're leaving," she said firmly. "This place is overreacting." But the manager didn't move. "Not until we sort this out," he said. By now phones were out. I saw at least 3 people recording, their faces tense, brows drawn together, not hungry for drama, but disturbed by what they were witnessing. This wasn't entertainment. This was uncomfortable, and that discomfort was finally no longer mine alone. Security arrived. 2 men, calm but unmistakably authoritative. They positioned themselves between the table and the exit. My sister's voice rose. "Are you kidding me?" Over this? She gestured at me like I was an inconvenience. One slap, she continued. She provoked me. That was when I found my voice. Quiet, steady, clear. I didn't touch her. I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult her. I paused, swallowing hard. She slapped me. In front of everyone. The words sounded strange out loud. Not because they weren't true, but because I had been trained my whole life not to say them. The manager nodded. That's what multiple witnesses are confirming. My sister looked around, finally seeing the room for what it was. Not an audience she controlled, but a jury she did. And for the first time, she looked nervous. My mother stepped forward. You're blowing this out of proportion, she said sharply. She's always been sensitive. Sensitive. Another familiar word. Another excuse. One of the security guards spoke up then, his voice calm but firm. Ma'am, he said to my sister, we're going to have to ask you to leave. Her eyes widened. You're kicking me out? Yes. What about her? She demanded, pointing at me. The guard glanced at me briefly, then back at her. She didn't assault anyone. That was the moment my sister realized that outside our family bubble, outside the rules that always protected her, her behavior didn't get rewritten. There were no excuses here. No, that's just how she is. No mother stepping in to smooth it over. Just witnesses, just consequences. Her face flushed deep red. This isn't over, she hissed at me as security began escorting her away. You'll regret this. I didn't respond. For the first time in my life, I didn't shrink. I didn't apologize. I didn't chase after her to fix what she'd broken. I stayed seated. And as she was led past the tables, past the stairs, past the phones still recording, I realized something powerful. The room had frozen for her, but it had thawed for me. I didn't stand up right away after they took her. I stayed in my chair, my hands resting flat on the table, my heart still pounding in my ears like a warning drum. The restaurant had started breathing again, quiet murmurs returning, chairs scraping softly, the low hum of conversations cautiously restarting, but everything sounded far away, like I was underwater. The manager asked if I was okay. The waiter brought me a glass of water I hadn't asked for. Someone at a nearby table leaned over and whispered, "I'm so sorry that happened to you." I nodded. I thanked them. I smiled when it felt expected, but inside I was unraveling. Not from fear, not from embarrassment, but from something much more disorienting. Relief. A dangerous kind of relief. Because once someone like my sister loses control in public, you realize something you were never supposed to learn. She was never powerful. She was just protected. When I finally stood, my legs trembled. Not weak, just unfamiliar with holding me upright without shrinking. I grabbed my coat and followed the trail of noise toward the entrance. Outside, the night air hit my face cool and sharp, sobering. The streetlights cast long shadows across the sidewalk, stretching people into shapes that didn't quite match who they really were. My sister was there, pacing. Fast, angry steps, hands flying through the air as she talked, not to anyone in particular, just at the world. Security stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watchful. And my mother stood beside her, close enough to touch, whispering urgently into her ear. I stopped a few steps away and listened. This part still echoes in my chest. She humiliated you, my mother said fiercely. She wanted this. She's always been jealous. Jealous. That word again. My sister spun around when she noticed me. Her face twisted instantly, rage, betrayal, disbelief, all colliding at once. There she is, she snapped. Look at her, acting like some kind of victim. I didn't respond right away. I let the silence sit between us, heavy and deliberate. Because for once, I wasn't afraid of what she'd fill it with. You hit me, I said finally. My voice didn't shake. That surprised even me. She scoffed loudly. Oh my God. Don't start. Don't start? I repeated. You slapped me in the face, in a restaurant. You provoked me, she shot back. You always do. My mother stepped in front of her slightly, like a shield. You know how she is, she said to me sharply. You know what buttons not to press. That sentence had been used my entire life as justification. Translation: if she hurts you, it's because you allowed it. Something hardened inside me. I didn't press anything. I said. I sat there. I ate my food. I answered questions. My sister laughed bitterly. You sit there like you're better than everyone, she said. Like you deserve to be at the table. The words landed hard. Because they weren't about dinner. They never had been. They were about hierarchy, about who was allowed to speak, who was allowed to exist comfortably, who was expected to stay small so someone else could feel big. I deserve to be anywhere I choose, I said quietly. Her eyes flashed. You really think you won something tonight? She hissed. All you did was embarrass the family. There it was. Not she embarrassed herself. Not violence isn't okay. But you made us look bad. My mother nodded. You should have handled it privately, she added. Now everyone thinks we're abusive. I finished. The word landed like a dropped plate. My mother flinched. My sister stared at me like I'd committed treason. How dare you? My mother said, her voice trembling with fury. After everything we've done for you. I almost laughed. Everything they'd done to me made. My sister stepped closer then, invading my space the way she always did when she wanted to intimidate. You think security makes you brave? She whispered. You think strangers choosing your side changes anything? Her breath smelled like wine. Her hands were clenched tight. I didn't move back. No, I said. I think consequences do. That stopped her, just for a second. A crack. She wasn't used to that word being applied to her. My mother grabbed her arm. Let's go, she said tightly. This isn't worth it. But my sister wasn't finished. You're going to regret this, she said, louder now, making sure passers-by could hear. You always do. You always come crawling back. That's when I realized something chilling. She wasn't angry because she'd been escorted out. She was angry because the old script had failed. I hadn't cried. I hadn't begged. I hadn't apologized for being hit. And without my submission, she didn't know who she was. I'm not crawling anywhere, I said calmly. I'm walking away. I turned, and that simple act, sent her spiraling. Don't turn your back on me, she screamed. Heads turned again. Someone slowed their steps. Security shifted closer. My sister lunged forward. Just half a step, enough to show intent. Ma'am, one of the guards warned. My mother grabbed her. Hard. Stop it, she hissed. You're making it worse. Worse. Not wrong. Not dangerous. Just worse. I walked to my car with my hands shaking. Not from fear but from adrenaline finally draining out of me. I sat inside for a long moment without starting the engine, staring at my reflection in the windshield. My cheek was already swelling slightly. A mark, visible, proof, and for the first time I didn't rush to cover it. I didn't rationalize it away. I let it exist, because it told a truth I had spent years denying. My phone buzzed. A message from my mother. You need to apologize. This has gone too far. I stared at the screen. Then another message came through. This one from my sister. You've always needed to be put in your place. Tonight just happened to be public. I didn't reply. For once, silence wasn't compliance. It was choice. I started the car and drove home. The city lights blurring past me as something settled deep in my chest. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Because when someone loses control in front of witnesses, they don't regain it quietly. They unravel. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was replaying the slap, but because I was replaying everything that came before it. Every dinner where I'd been talked over. Every family gathering where jokes landed a little too hard on me, and no one intervened. Every moment my discomfort was reframed as sensitivity, weakness, exaggeration. The slap hadn't come out of nowhere. It had simply run out of cover. By the time morning light crept through the blinds, my phone had already buzzed itself awake. Missed calls, unread messages, a growing knot of tension pressing against my ribs before I even unlocked the screen. The first message was from my mother. We need to talk. You went too far last night. I stared at it for a long moment. Too far. Not she crossed a line. Not you were hurt. Not violence isn't okay. Too far. Because I hadn't absorbed it quietly. Another message followed, longer this time. You embarrassed your sister in public. People are talking. You could have handled it privately like an adult. I let out a slow breath. Privately. That word again. Private was where everything had always happened. Private was where harm stayed invisible. Private was where she thrived. The next message came from my sister. No greeting. No hesitation. You think you're some kind of hero now? You ruined everything. Then another. Mom hasn't stopped crying. And another. You always play the victim. I put the phone face down and sat at the edge of my bed, grounding myself in the quiet. This was the part they never prepared for. They expected me to fold, to apologize for being hit, to smooth things over, to restore the old order. They didn't expect me to sit still. Mid-morning the calls started. My aunt, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years, even a family friend who had no business weighing in on anything. The story had spread. But not the truth. A version of a carefully edited narrative, where my sister was provoked, my mother was defending her child, and I was dramatic, disrespectful, unstable. I listened to one voicemail all the way through, just one. It ended with "She didn't mean it like that. You know how she is." That sentence landed heavier than any insult, because it confirmed what I'd always suspected. Everyone knew. They just didn't care enough to stop it. I deleted the voicemail. Then another. Not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. Around noon my sister made her move. I knew she would. People like her don't retreat when they lose control. They escalate strategically. She didn't come to my house. She didn't call me directly. She went where she always went when she wanted leverage. She went to other people. By early afternoon, screenshots started arriving. A cousin sent one first. Hesitantly. "I don't want to get involved," the message said. "But is this true?" Attached was a post. My sister's post. It was long. Carefully written. Emotionally loaded. She talked about family betrayal, about years of disrespect, about how she'd finally snapped, after being pushed too far. She never mentioned the slap. Not directly. She described it as a heated moment, as if violence were weather. The comments were worse. People sympathizing, people validating her anger, people speculating about my character, and threaded through it all was one repeated theme. Why would you do this to your own sister? I felt something inside me go very cold. Not angry, not shocked, resolved. This wasn't just about one night anymore. This was about erasing me completely. My pain, my experience, my voice. And she was doing it with confidence. Because she'd done it before. I didn't respond right away. That was the mistake everyone expected me to make. Instead, I waited. I let her version spread. I let people show me exactly who they were when given a choice between truth and convenience. Some reached out privately, unsure. Some stayed silent. Some doubled down publicly, praising her strength. I took note of all of it. Then late in the afternoon, my mother showed up at my door. No call. No warning. Just a knock. Sharp and insistent. I opened it slowly. She didn't look worried. She looked furious. "This has to stop," she said immediately, stepping inside like she still owned the space. I closed the door behind her. "What exactly needs to stop?" She turned on me, eyes blazing. "You dragging this out. The posts. The gossip you're feeding," I said calmly. She scoffed. "Don't twist this." "I'm not," I replied. "I'm naming it." She crossed her arms. "You know your sister. You know she reacts. You should have let it go." I felt something in my chest tighten. Not pain, but finality. "Let it go," I said quietly. She hit me. "She didn't mean to hurt you," my mother snapped. "She meant to dominate me," I answered. "And you backed her." My mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. That hesitation, that fraction of a second told me everything. "You're choosing sides," I continued. "And you always have." Her voice rose. "I am choosing peace." "No," I said. You're choosing silence, and silence has only ever protected one person. She stepped closer. You're tearing this family apart. I met her gaze without flinching. I didn't tear anything apart, I said. I stopped holding it together alone. That was when she said the thing that finally broke whatever thread still connected us. If you had just known your place, she said slowly, none of this would have happened. The room went quiet. I stared at her, really stared. And for the first time I saw her clearly too. Not as my mother, as my sister's ally. I do know my place, I said softly. And it's not under anyone's hand. She left shortly after that. No hug. No apology. Just a tight-lipped exit, and a door closing that sounded permanent. By evening, the tide began to shift. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But cracks started appearing. Someone posted a comment asking why security had been called. Another asked if there were witnesses. Someone else mentioned seeing a video. Because there was one. Someone in the restaurant had recorded the moment after the slap. Not the strike itself but the aftermath. My sister standing. Me frozen. The manager stepping in. Security arriving. No context. No spin. Just reality. The comments changed. Questions replaced certainty. Doubt crept in where confidence had lived hours earlier. And my sister started deleting. That's when I knew. She wasn't losing control. She was losing credibility. And by the time night fell again, I realized something that felt almost unreal. For the first time in my life, the story wasn't being written about me. I was writing it myself. By the next morning, something had changed. Not in the house, not in my body, but in the air around my sister. You could feel it even from a distance, that subtle, frantic shift that happens when someone who has always controlled the narrative realizes the story is slipping out of their hands. Her posts were gone. Not edited. Not clarified. Deleted. One by one. The comments vanished too, especially the ones asking uncomfortable questions. Especially the ones mentioning security. Especially the ones pointing out that a heated moment doesn't usually involve a manager calling guards. People don't erase things when they're innocent. They erase them when they're scared. The calls weren't angry anymore. They weren't accusatory. They were cautious. A cousin asked, quietly, what really happened. An aunt said she'd heard another side and didn't know what to believe. Someone else admitted they'd been at the restaurant. Not at our table but close enough to see the aftermath, and said they hadn't spoken up before because they didn't want family drama. Family drama. Another phrase that had protected her for years. But drama doesn't usually involve witnesses, or security, or a swelling bruise that took days to fade. I answered calmly, briefly, without emotion. I didn't defend myself. I didn't need to. Truth doesn't beg. That alone told me everything. I let it ring. Then again. On the fourth attempt, I picked up. I didn't say hello. She spoke first. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Her voice was tight, not furious, not mocking, but strained, like someone holding a glass together with shaking hands. No, I said evenly. I'm done absorbing it. There was a pause, then a laugh, short, brittle. You think you're winning something here? I think you're losing something, I replied. And you don't know how to stop it. Her breath hitched. That was new. You need to fix this, she said. Not asked, ordered. Fix what? This mess, she snapped. People are talking. Mom's being dragged into it. You made us look violent. Us. Even now. She needed a shield. I didn't make you hit me, I said. And I didn't make you defend it. Silence. Then her tone shifted. Slower. More deliberate. You know how this ends if you keep pushing, she said quietly. You'll be cut off. No one will side with you. I smiled to myself. You already tried that, I said. It only worked when I still needed your approval. Her voice sharpened. So what? You think strangers matter more than family now? No, I answered. I think accountability matters more than hierarchy. She hung up. That afternoon, the real consequences started landing. Not loud ones, not dramatic ones. The worst kind, quiet, irreversible ones. Her job called. Not to fire her, not yet, but to ask questions. Someone had emailed them the video. Not maliciously, just factually. The email didn't accuse. It asked whether someone who behaved like that in public represented the company's values. That's how reality works outside family bubbles. It doesn't scream. It documents. She showed up at my door that evening, unannounced, uninvited, different woman. No swagger, no sharp grin, no raised chin. Her shoulders were tense. Her jaw clenched so tightly it looked painful. I didn't invite her in. We stood on opposite sides of the threshold, symbolic in a way that felt almost too perfect. "You need to make a statement," she said immediately. "A public one. Say it was a misunderstanding." I leaned against the doorframe. "You slapped me," she scoffed weakly. "You keep saying it like that. Because that's what happened." Her eyes darted away for half a second. I was angry. Anger doesn't excuse assault. She exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. "You don't understand what this is doing to me." I tilted my head. "No," I said. "I understand exactly what it's doing. You're being seen without protection." Her face hardened. "You always wanted this," she snapped. "To make me look bad." I shook my head slowly. "No, I wanted you to stop." She laughed bitterly. "Stop what?" I met her, treating me like something you're allowed to correct with your hands. That landed. She swallowed. The silence stretched. Then she did something she had never done before. She lowered her voice. "I said know your place," she muttered. "You didn't have to take it this far." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step closer. I said, "My place is not beneath you." And it never was. Her lips parted. Not to argue, but because something in her finally hit a wall. "You're ruining the family," she whispered. "No," I replied. "I'm ending a system that only worked for you." She stared at me for a long moment. Then she said the sentence that told me everything had changed. "You don't get to come back from this." I smiled. Not cruelly, not triumphantly, but with clarity. I already had. She left without another word. No apology, no closure, just retreat. And for the first time I understood something crucial. She didn't need forgiveness to learn her lesson. She needed consequences she couldn't rewrite. Over the next few days, the fallout continued. Invitations stopped coming to her. Conversations shifted away from her version. People grew careful around her, not because they believed everything I said, but because doubt had entered the room. And once doubt exists, dominance dies. She stopped posting, stopped calling, stopped pretending this would blow over. Because it wasn't about drama anymore. It was about exposure. And exposure doesn't fade quickly. One night, my mother called. Her voice was tired. "She's struggling," she said quietly. I waited. "She says you won't speak to her." I inhaled. Correct. A pause. Then reluctantly, she crossed a line. I closed my eyes. Not in relief. In acknowledgement. "That line was always there," I said. "She just never expected anyone to stop her." My mother didn't argue. That told me everything. By the end of the week, my sister had learned something she'd never been forced to learn before. She could no longer control me. She could no longer control the story. And she could no longer control the room. And that terrified her more than losing her temper ever had. Time didn't heal anything. That was the first truth I learned after everything went quiet. People love to say time fixes things. That emotions cool, that memories soften, that wounds scar over until they barely matter. But time doesn't heal what was never acknowledged. It only exposes it. And as the days turned into weeks, what had happened that night didn't fade. It settled. My sister didn't disappear completely. She just shrank. Not physically, socially. Her name stopped coming up the way it used to. Her opinions stopped being treated like final judgments. Her presence stopped rearranging rooms. When she did show up at family gatherings, she arrived later than usual and left earlier than she ever had before. She sat instead of standing, listened instead of interrupting. People watched her now, not admiringly, cautiously. That's what happens when someone who built power on intimidation loses the illusion of untouchability. They don't get chased out, they get repositioned. And that kind of fall is harder to climb back from than outright exile. I felt the shift most clearly the first time I saw her again. It was at a family event, unavoidable, neutral ground. No alcohol, no speeches, no chance for theatrics. She walked in and stopped when she saw me. Just stopped. Like her body hadn't yet adjusted to the idea that I didn't move out of her way anymore. For a split second, the old instinct flickered across her face, the one that said I'll handle this. Then she caught herself. She didn't approach. She nodded. A small, stiff acknowledgement. No apology, no explanation, just recognition. And that was enough, because apologies are easy when they cost nothing. Recognition costs power. One afternoon, weeks later, she said it. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just honestly. She went too far. I didn't answer right away. Not because I needed time, but because I needed her to sit in that sentence without me rescuing her from it. She always has, I said finally. This time it just wasn't hidden. My mother nodded slowly. She doesn't know how to deal with this, she admitted. She's never had consequences like this. There it was. Not she regrets it. Not she understands now. But she doesn't know how to live without control. And for the first time, I didn't feel responsible for teaching her. I wasn't treated like the family inconvenience anymore. I wasn't spoken over. I wasn't nudged aside to make room. People waited when I spoke, asked my opinion, checked in. Not out of pity but respect. Because something had changed in how I carried myself. I no longer explained my presence. I no longer softened my words to keep others comfortable. I didn't announce boundaries. I enforced them. And the world responded accordingly. My sister noticed. I saw it in the way her eyes tracked conversations. She used to dominate but now had no claim over. In the way she paused before speaking, calculating instead of commanding. Once she tried to slip into an old pattern, correcting me mid-sentence, voice sharpening instinctively. The room went quiet. Not because I froze, but because everyone else did. She caught it immediately. Stopped. Cleared her throat. Let me finish. That moment told me everything. She hadn't become kinder. She had become careful. And sometimes that's the only lesson someone like her ever learns. Because forgiveness would have implied the story was between just the two of us. It wasn't. It was about a system. A hierarchy that had existed for years where one person stood tall because everyone else stayed small. That system collapsed the moment it went public. And it never rebuilt itself. The last time we were in the same room for any length of time, she said something that confirmed it. It was quiet. Almost casual. I didn't think it would go that far, she said, not looking at me. I nodded once. I know, that was it. No argument. No closure scene. Because closure isn't something you give to someone who refuses accountability. Closure is something you build for yourself. Else something you build for yourself. That oppress. What stayed with me most wasn't her discomfort. It was my own peace. I slept better. Spoke more freely. Stopped bracing myself. Before every interaction, I wasn't waiting for the next correction anymore. Because the truth had finally been established. Not just between us, but in front of witnesses. She was not my authority. She never had been. And knowing my place turned out to be the most powerful thing I'd ever done. By the end, everyone learned something. My sister learned that control doesn't survive exposure. My mother learned that silence is a side. And I learned that dignity doesn't ask permission. It takes up space. The restaurant froze that night. But the world didn't. It moved on just without her at the center. And that was the lesson she will carry for the rest of her life.